Okay, so scary Russians, right? That's a stereotype we hear all the time.
Yeah, like it's everywhere. In movies, memes. I mean, you hear it in everyday conversation.
It's like it's just become this accepted thing, you know? But for this deep dive, we're going to look at this Are Russians Scary video script you sent
Okay.
and really try to unpack this whole stereotype thing.
Well, that sounds good.
Go beyond just the cliches and see, what's the real deal with Russian culture, their history.
And their personality.
Yeah, exactly. And you know where I think we should start?
Where?
Hollywood.
You're good.
Hollywood loves to paint a very specific picture of Russians.
Right.
You think about how many times you've seen like a Russian villain, the thick accent, the whole intimidating vibe.
Oh, absolutely. It's like they always got to be these brooding, intense figures.
And calculating.
Ruthless.
Yeah.
I mean, Hollywood does love its tropes, right? And the stoic Russian, it's definitely one of them.
It's like they took all those anxieties from the Cold War and just poured them into this one character type.
Absolutely.
And speaking of the Cold War, our script actually talks about how that whole era, really shaped how the West sees Russia.
It's true. The Cold War had a huge impact.
Yeah.
It was this time of, massive ideological conflict between the Soviet Union and the West. And both sides, they were using propaganda to make the other look bad.
It was like this constant back and forth,
Yeah.
and it really created this atmosphere of fear and distrust.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't just like abstract fear either. There were some real events that happened
Oh, yeah.
that kind of made things
For
worse.
sure. Like you think about the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, the whole world was on edge, thinking nuclear war could actually happen.
That must have been terrifying.
Oh, it was. And in the minds of a lot of people in the West, it kind of cemented this idea of the Soviet Union as a dangerous and unpredictable force.
Like they couldn't be trusted.
Right.
And then you also had things like the Soviet Union putting down those uprisings in Hungary and Czechoslovakia,
Right.
which just further reinforced that image of them being willing to use force to maintain control.
Absolutely.
So you've got Hollywood pushing out these stereotypical images and then real historical events that, make people even more scared.
Yeah.
It's no wonder this whole scary Russian image stuck around.
I know, right?
But our script actually goes deeper than just those surface explanations and starts talking about some really interesting cultural nuances.
Oh, interesting.
For example, it talks about how Russians are often seen as more reserved than people from other cultures.
Okay.
Like they don't really smile at strangers or, do a lot of small talk.
I can see how that could be misinterpreted, especially in Western cultures.
Yeah.
Where, smiling is considered polite.
Right.
Like, it's just a way to be friendly.
Exactly.
But in Russia, smiling is often reserved for, genuine interactions.
So it's more about a true connection.
Exactly. It's about expressing real warmth, not just being polite.
So it's not that they're being unfriendly. It's more that they save that warmth for when it really matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You got it.
Huh. That's a really interesting point.
It is.
And this whole idea about being reserved on the surface, but then incredibly welcoming once you get to know them.
Yes.
That really challenges the idea that they're just cold or unfeeling.
It really does. It shows that, first impressions can be totally wrong.
You can't judge a book by its cover.
Exactly. And cultural differences often play a huge role in how we see and understand other people's behavior.
So it seems like the key takeaway here is don't just look at the surface. You got to dig a little deeper to really get what's going on.
I agree.
But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about another part of this scary Russian image.
Okay.
Their toughness.
Right.
The script points out that Russia's history and environment have basically created a certain resilience in its people. They've dealt with those crazy winters, faced invasions, gone through all those political upheavals.
They've definitely been through a lot.
It's like they've been put through the ringer over and over again, but they always come out stronger.
And that resilience, it goes beyond just physical endurance.
Right.
You see it in their art, their literature, even how they approach problems.
It's like it's woven into their culture.
Exactly.
Think about Russian literature, right? You've got Dostoevsky exploring human suffering, Solzhenitsyn talking about the Gulag system. It's heavy stuff.
It is. But it shows how they grapple with these really tough themes of hardship and perseverance.
So this toughness, it's not just a stereotype. It's like a core part of who they are.
Right.
But I do wonder, is there a danger in oversimplifying it?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, could this focus on resilience also lead to, people suppressing their emotions or not asking for help when they need it?
That's a great question. And it's something that people who study Russian culture, debate all the time.
Yeah, I
But
totally agree.
resilience is definitely a strength, but it can also have its
I
downsides.
guess it all goes back to nuance, right? No single characteristic can define an entire culture or its people.
Couldn't agree more.
But speaking of nuance, let's talk about a side of Russian culture that people don't often talk about,
Okay.
their sense of humor.
Oh, interesting.
The script describes it as dry, dark, and ironic.
Yeah, it can definitely be a bit jarring if you're not used to it.
Right.
Russians, they often use humor as like a way to deal with tough stuff
Yeah.
or to point out like how absurd life can be.
You know, I've heard that their jokes are so subtle
Oh, yeah.
that you might not even know they're joking.
That's true. That happens a lot.
Like, is this a joke? Are they being serious?
Right. They're very good at that deadpan delivery.
Yeah.
And they use a lot of wordplay, too.
Oh, I bet that gets lost in translation.
Oh, absolutely. It's tough to understand if you're not familiar with, like, the whole cultural context.
So you kind of need to be in the know.
Yeah, you got to have a feel for it.
Do you have an example, like a typical Russian joke?
Sure. Okay, here's one. A man walks into a doctor's office and says, "Doctor, help me. I'm a kleptomaniac and I can't stop stealing."
Oh, no.
And the doctor replies, "Take this seat, please. I think you took it from the waiting room."
Oh, okay, I see.
You see,
It's very, like,
very dry,
dry. Yeah.
understated,
Yeah, it's subtle.
very subtle.
I can see how that would take some getting used to.
Yeah, for sure.
But it is interesting how humor, even dark humor like that, can be a way to process, like, tough times
It is. It's a coping mechanism.
and also find some lightness,
Exactly.
even when things are really dark.
And it's also a way to connect with other people who get it.
Right, who share that same kind of worldview.
Exactly, like a secret language
Yeah.
that only
Alan.
some people are in on.
This whole deep dive has really shown a different side to this scary Russian thing.
It is.
We've seen how those cultural nuances, the historical context, even their humor,
Yeah,
it can be so easily misunderstood.
absolutely. If you don't take the time to really understand them,
It really highlights how different doesn't mean dangerous.
it really does. It's so important to remember that.
And speaking of challenging those assumptions,
Yeah.
let's talk about one more stereotype that always comes up with Russians,
Okay.
their love of vodka.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
Everyone's heard that joke about Russians drinking vodka like it's water.
Right, like it's nothing.
But while that's obviously a bit of an exaggeration,
Of course.
vodka does have a special place in their culture.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's important to remember that it's not just about getting drunk.
Right.
It's more about the whole social ritual.
The tradition.
Yeah, sharing a drink with family and friends.
Yeah, the stories that come out.
Yeah, and it's about those bonds that get stronger over a bottle.
That's what it's really about.
So it's more about the connection, the camaraderie,
Yeah, creating a sense of closeness and trust.
breaking down those barriers
Mhm.
and creating that space for like genuine connection.
Exactly.
It sounds like vodka, in a way, is similar to humor for them. It's a way to cope, to connect,
I like that, yeah.
and to find comfort with the people around you.
I think you're right. They both kind of serve as a way to deal with life's ups and downs,
Yeah?
to find those moments of joy and connection, even when things are tough.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening.
It has been.
It's like we've peeled back the layers of that scary Russian stereotype
Yeah.
and found something much more interesting underneath.
More complex.
More human.
Yeah.
We've seen how cultural differences, historical events,
And those ingrained values.
yeah, all of that can really shape how we see other people.
It's a reminder that different doesn't equal dangerous.
So, to bring it back to our original question, are Russians scary? I think we can safely say no.
I think so too.
They're complex, they're resilient,
They're warm.
and they're full of surprises.
Yeah, and like any culture, they have their own, quirks and complexities
Absolutely.
that deserve to be understood.
And appreciate.
This deep dive has shown us that the scary Russian thing, it's just a lazy stereotype.
Yeah.
It doesn't capture the real them at all.
It's a reminder that the world is full of amazing stories, but we have to be willing to look past those preconceived notions
Absolutely.
and approach other cultures with curiosity and an open mind.
I couldn't agree more.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So as we wrap up, what really stuck with you about all this?
You know, it's that contrast. Like, we hear stoic Russians, right? But then learning about how much they value real connection, their hospitality, the role of humor, and even vodka in their social lives, it just paints a whole different picture.
It does, doesn't it?
It's like those quote-unquote scary traits.
Yeah.
They're just one part of the story, not the whole thing.
Exactly. And it makes me think of some anthropologists who argue that, that focus on resilience, emotional control in Russian culture, it's actually a strength,
Mm.
a way to deal with all those historical hardships, and keep things together when times are tough.
So it's not about being, like, emotionless.
No, not at all.
It's more about channeling those emotions in a way that, like, helps the whole group.
Exactly.
It's really interesting.
It is.
It's like those traits, they're adaptations, almost like cultural tools for survival.
I like that.
And it makes you wonder, could we learn something from that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everyone faces challenges.
Right.
And maybe a bit of that Russian resilience wouldn't be a bad thing.
Yeah, that ability to, like, face things head on, adapt, and keep going.
It's powerful.
Those are qualities that go beyond just one culture.
For sure.
And then their emphasis on real connection, like those deep relationships.
Yeah.
That's something we could all use a bit more of.
Especially in today's world, where everything feels so fast-paced and superficial.
Yeah, it's a good reminder to slow down.
Be present.
Be present, yeah.
And really put effort into the relationships that truly matter.
But, thinking about all that, with their focus on being genuine and avoiding anything superficial,
Yeah.
wouldn't that make it harder for outsiders to, like, connect with Russians?
It's possible.
Like, is there a risk of misinterpreting things?
Oh, for sure. Cultural differences, they can definitely lead to misunderstandings.
Yeah.
Especially with how people communicate and those social cues.
So what do you do?
I think the key is to go into those interactions with curiosity and an open mind.
Okay.
You got to be aware of that cultural context and be willing to, adjust your own expectations.
So instead of, like, jumping to conclusions, give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, and try to see things from their perspective.
Be their side of things.
Exactly. And remember, building those bridges, it takes time.
It's not going to happen overnight.
Right. You got to be patient, respectful, and willing to learn from each other.
I'm really glad we did this deep dive.
You too.
It's made me rethink a lot of what I thought I knew about Russian culture. And it's definitely opened my eyes to how much more there is to discover.
That's what it's all about, right? Expanding our understanding of the world.
Yeah.
Challenging our assumptions.
And connecting with other cultures on a deeper level.
Exactly.
It's like we're reminded that the world is full of incredible stories.
So many stories.
As long as we're willing to, take the time to explore them.
To really dive in.
So to everyone listening, next time you hear that scary Russian stereotype, remember what we talked about?
Think about the nuances.
Remember, there's more to it than what you see on the surface.
Challenge those assumptions.
Embrace those nuances.
And be open to the real story.
You might just be surprised by what you find.
You really might.
You might even realize that the things we first see as scary or intimidating, they can actually be strengths.
Resilience, connection.
Exactly. And that's a pretty valuable lesson.
No matter where you are in the world.
Couldn't agree more.
That's it for this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep learning, and until next time.